shouldn't let taxes go up on working families. We shouldn't let child poverty continue to stain the conscience or drag down our economy. And so I say to my colleagues in Congress, this tax cut for working families is something we should extend, not end next year.
When President Biden expanded the child tax credit as part of the American Rescue Plan earlier this year, hopes of helping the nation's poor were high. The Brookings Institute projected Biden's child tax credit, if made permanent, would cut child poverty by half across all racial groups. By August of this year, the child tax credit lifted 3 million children out of poverty, according to a Columbia University study. The Biden administration had aimed to make the child tax credit permanent by adding it to the reconciliation bill. That was until Senator Joe Manchin began slashing it with a red pen. Manchin reportedly told the White House the child tax credit must include a new work requirement for families eligible for the allowance and must cap at incomes of $60,000 a year. The change would dramatically weaken the program and is just the latest iteration of Manchin's moves to cut into Biden's Build Back Better agenda. Earlier today, I sat down with former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich to discuss. Take a listen. Hello, Professor Reich. Thank you for joining us today. Axios is reporting that Senator Joe Manchin has indicated to the White House that he is going to demand both a income cap of about $60,000 on the expanded child tax credit, and is going to require that there be a work requirement to go along with it. What will this mean for this provision of the proposed legislation?
Well, if this particular provision is part of the legislation, it means that a lot of people who need the benefits of that child tax credit are not going to get it. Simply because, number one, there are a lot of places around the country where the cost of living is very high compared to, say, West Virginia. So that if you put a $60,000 cap, you're going to miss a lot of people who are earning $70,000 or $80,000 a year, who, it may sound like a lot of money, but on the West Coast, in San Francisco, near San Francisco, or in Boston or in Massachusetts, it's not going to go very far. And many of those people are going to be very needy, and many of those people are going to have children who, in turn, are needy. The other thing that worries me about Manchin's, what Manchin wants to do is he's basically setting the entire program up for failure, because once these programs are perceived as only for quote unquote poor people, they lose political support very rapidly among the vast number of people who consider themselves lower middle class or maybe working class, but not exactly poor.
Do you believe that this is somehow a punishment or a tax on people living in liberal cities or in blue states? Because those are the cities, sometimes states, where the cost of living is the highest.
Yeah, well, what we know, it's interesting, Charles, not only is the cost of living highest in many blue states and so-called blue cities, but also if you look at the flow of funds in terms of taxes, those blue states, blue cities are already sending more money into Washington that is then therefore sent to red states and red cities than otherwise. That is, the Democratic, capital D, places in the United States are already subsidizing many of the Republican states and Republican cities in this country, and I think that's not sustainable.
To what degree are these work requirements caught up in the kind of psychology of not wanting poor people to exploit the system? Like, the poor people become the boogeymen whenever there are subsidies to go to them, which is very different from how we think about subsidies going to corporations or the wealthy.
Well, we have in this country, clearly, we have socialism for the wealthy. That is, if you look at the bailouts of the banks, or you look at how much people who are executives of corporations who've done a bad job, how much they collect in turn when they leave because the corporation gives them golden parachutes, or any other kinds of attributes of our system that continuously rewards people who are already very powerful or already quite privileged in ways that almost everybody else is struggling to achieve. We have a system of socialism for the rich and everybody else subjected to a system of very, very harsh capitalism. Work requirements built into public assistance is a good example of harsh capitalism, because when people need assistance most is when they can't get work, or they can't find work, or they can only work part-time. They don't have childcare. They don't have the kinds of support systems that they need in order to work full-time. And we're saying to those people, you have got to work full-time. You are the ones who are subjected to this most sharpest, most difficult aspect of capitalism. We also, just to put a cap on that particular point, Charles, we have a system of macroeconomic policy that is trying to keep inflation down. And this is what the Fed has done for years. But in order to do so, a certain amount of unemployment is assumed to be necessary. Who are the people who are drafted into that inflation fight first? They tend to be the poor people. They're the first to be fired. They're the last to be hired. And we're saying to them, through these kind of work requirements, well, you, even though you are first and last, you are drafted into the inflation fight, you are the ones who are not going to be able to get public assistance when it's most needed.
Manchin is not just trying to put requirements on the child tax credit. He also wants to cut the clean electricity payment program, which is like the most ambitious part of the climate proposal in the bill. And he also wants to make sure that the Hyde Amendment is in the bill. And the Hyde Amendment, for those who don't understand it, prevents Medicaid and other federal programs from having any money fund abortion expenses. What do you think about Manchin being the kingmaker here, basically writing policy, writing the bill because they can't pass it without his approval?
Well, we are at a very rare moment in political and historic time in which you've got 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, and you have a vice president who's the tiebreaker, which means that every single one of these 50 Democrats has enormous bargaining leverage if they are going to exercise that leverage. And Joe Manchin,
but none of them are using it like Manchin.
No, and Kirsten Sinema is coming pretty close. In fact, Kirsten Sinema may be just like Manchin at the end of the day. Joe Manchin is doing this because presumably he wants West Virginians to think of him as almost a Republican, because West Virginia is a very Republican state. But here is the irony. West Virginia is also one of the poorest states in the Union. West Virginians are going to suffer to the extent that there are all kinds of requirements and all kinds of hobbles that get in the way of getting public assistance. West Virginians already suffer some tremendous environmental hazards like flooding. We know that West Virginians really cannot, over the long term, rely on coal. Coal is a dying industry. What you need is for investments in the future in West Virginia. You need West Virginians to be able to get community college and K through 12 and all kinds of public investments that are built into the bill that Joe Manchin is stymieing. If I were in West Virginia and I knew what was going on, you can bet I would not vote for Joe Manchin next time.
Professor Rice, always a pleasure to get your insights on these issues. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.